Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the podcast. Today, we have Rob Litterst joining us. And Rob, maybe you give yourself a quick introduction and tell everybody what you do.
For sure. So I am the co-founder of a company called PricingSaaS. And basically, we're trying to become the first stop for SaaS pricing. So we have kind of an ecosystem of content, community, data and research, and professional services that we kind of blend together into this kind of constellation to help make pricing and packaging easier for SaaS builders and founders.
Wonderful.
Before this, I've spent about the last 12 years in SaaS, and 3 of those were spent as a pricing strategist at Profitwell. So spent a lot of time working on pricing with early stage up to like public SaaS companies, and really caught the bug and kind of fell in love with it. And from there started a newsletter. The newsletter kind of funneled into PricingSaaS, and here we are today.
Very cool. Very cool. And topic of the day today, monetization. Right?
Yeah.
You're seeing all sorts of interesting trends out there, from some of the things that AI is forcing, some of the different things that we're seeing around, price crunch or value crunch from every single CFO out there. Are we getting the value out of the software that we're using, and what does that look like? And one of the things that we've been seeing is this trend around a shift towards usage-based or outcome-based pricing along those lines. And I'm just curious on your insights of kind of why is that evolving now? What's kind of driving that change that you're starting to see in the industry?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think in the past, so if you think about going from like on-prem to SaaS, that was a really big shift in kind of like how pricing models function in the world of SaaS. Obviously, kind of like birthed software as a service, and kind of like the initial model that everybody went after there is just licenses, right? And typically licenses go down to seats. Over time, I think people have gotten more and more accustomed to other ways of charging. I think one of the reasons consumption pricing has gotten so hot is just because of how big AWS has gotten and how many different players there are kind of in that space that have just made consumption-based pricing and usage-based pricing more of an understood way to price and package a product. But I think like what AI is doing and why this conversation is kind of ripe again is because there's always been this kind of like dream of outcome-based pricing. Like if you think about kind of like the value chain of pricing metrics and kind of like how you can charge. On one end, you have inputs, and on the other end, you have outcomes. And this is something that I'm stealing from Ulrich Lerkopf-Schmidt, who runs Willingness to Pay, pricing expert. I just love this concept. I think it's a really easy way to break it down. But on the input side, you have like the seats or whatever you're paying for a license, right? So that's not like the actual outcome that you're looking for, but you're paying basically for your team to use the product to actually drive towards that outcome. In the middle, you have consumption. So you have, the number of whatever it is, like it could be API calls. It could be like the number of emails that you send. It could be the number of contacts in your database, whatever that might be. That's kind of closer to this ultimate outcome. You're paying more for how you're actually using the product and the value that you're ostensibly getting out of the product. What AI kind of promises is this idea that you might actually be able to pay for the work that you want to have done from the actual solution. And so the interesting thing about outcomes, and I know you, me, and Flavio talked about this previously, but it's getting a lot of PR. It's getting a lot of traffic on social media. It's one of those topics in pricing that's super, super hot right now. But I think the amount of people that are talking about it is way higher than the amount of people that are actually doing it. And the reason is because it's insanely hard. But what it promises, and kind of like what these LLMs and what AI is doing, is it's actually making it possible to get concrete tasks done and then charge based on those concrete tasks, rather than paying for something further up the stack like users or consumption. You can actually pay for a defined outcome. And so I think that's kind of why this conversation has become such a hot topic of late.
Yeah, and I think I've seen some really great graphics, and we've used them in some of our presentations, where we kind of call it the SaaSometer. that goes all the way from the one side, which, the perpetual, buy it once, stand it up on-prem, right, to the subscription, and then all the way to usage, and then out to outcome, right, as
For sure.
lever that goes all the way across, where at one end, there's zero risk to the vendor. And as you go more and more towards usage and outcome, the risk starts shifting towards the vendor, and it makes for shorter sales cycles, but you're taking on some different risks there. And I think one of the things that I think is a common misconception is that it's an all or nothing kind of a mentality. And I think it's really more about, whether it's hybrid or all the different types of pricing models, that what best suits your business. And I'm wondering what you're seeing is working in practice out there.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're right. I think hybrid pricing models have been kind of like the best place to land over the last 5 to 10 years, if you want to call it that. So I really kind of cut my teeth at HubSpot and was selling HubSpot, and we had a hybrid model where the pricing was based on the number of contacts that you had in your database. But then there was also kind of like this base license fee for each package. And what a hybrid does is it kind of like allows you to be really consultative when you're selling it. And it allows you to create these kind of dynamics where there's a natural story between each plans, and there's kind of a natural tipping point within each plan where it makes sense to upgrade. And so it makes customer conversations easier if you're kind of like a sales-led company. And so I still think that hybrid is really like one of the best ways to price. And I think if you look at the pushback that people have on licenses, is that it's kind of like disconnected or decoupled from value, right? And the problem that most people have with pure consumption is that it's really, really hard to forecast. And so if you have a hybrid model and you blend those two things, hybrid model or credits model, both of those ways of pricing essentially kind of blend licenses and consumption and allow you to have this kind of like predictable spend that is also correlated with how much you're using the product and should kind of like approximate how much value you're getting out of the product. I think we're still in a phase, I always refer back to this interview with Brad Birnbaum, who at the time was the CEO of Customer, like a customer success product competitor with Zendesk and some of those products. Back in 2018, they really wanted to go for a different value metric in their space. They were kind of thinking about how they could use value to get closer to the customer and shift their pricing model. And that could really be kind of a big positioning lever for them and a way for them to break into the market. And he mentioned that he had a ton of talks with customers and prospects, and all of them were we have a budget for seats. We're not ready to shift our entire budgeting mechanism at this point. And so I think part of pricing is understanding where your market's at and understanding what the market wants and really ensuring that whatever the model is that you're going after actually lines up with what your customer wants to pay for. Talking about getting out of SaaS, but not everything should be a subscription, So even realizing that we're starting to get to this point where I think especially with AI, there are going to be a lot of kind of combinations of AI technology and services. And so it'll be this kind of product enabled services, kind of hybrid. And most people look at services and they think of it as a one-time fee, right? They're not thinking about it as something that you're going to pay for month over month. And so I think that's going to be challenging for companies that are kind of trying to turn something that shouldn't be SaaS into SaaS over the next few years. But yeah, I still think hybrid is probably the best place to land. And I also think with these new models, what I like to see is companies that are kind of launching these new models alongside their existing model. And it's you don't want to flip all of your eggs into a new basket right away, but if you can launch that and put maybe 10% of your resources into that or something now, and over time gradually shift to that model, I think it just makes it makes the transition so much easier. You're going to have a way easier time with customers. So yeah, I'm a big fan of hybrid models as well. And yeah, I think that's probably.
And I think that's what we've been seeing as well. We price our products in that kind of hybrid sense as well, right? Because reality is, businesses still run on budgets.
Yeah.
Right. And they need to be able to come in and not go over budget or understand where they're going to land on the pricing. And if I don't know what I'm going to pay you over the next year, I don't know if it's in or out of budget. Right. And you could argue that, well, if you're going outcome-based pricing, then you're going to get, if you get more, you're paying more, then you're getting more value and it was worth it in the first place. But typically companies still run on budget dollars that get approved by the CFO and the CEO on what we're going to spend each year. So that predictability around, like you said, whether it's a wallet style of a drawdown, and I know if I'm going over, and if I'm going to go over, this is what I'm going to get charged in that overage along these lines. Because the CFO needs to do all of their revenue recognition. They need to do all of the different things that they need to do around the pricing of the product as well, right? And so I think, and it's maybe a good segue in kind of another topic here, is that with this different type of pricing and the way that you go to market with it and what you need to track and the systems you need to put in place, whether that's revenue recognition from usage and these sorts of things, there's a lot of plumbing in your organization that you need to have running in order to track everything accurately and making sure that you're on point. And I'm just curious on what you're seeing is kind of a stack that usually needs to be in place for someone to be able to start, like you said, adding on these new things, not necessarily doing a wholesale switch, but if they're starting to think about adding on these new pricing models, what do they need to think about on the back end?
Yeah, for sure. I really like the way, so a good buddy of mine is Finn Glover from Schematic, and he kind of like breaks it down into 3 stacks. It's like the sales stack, the finance stack, and the product stack. And I think that's right. And so I'm seeing a lot of new companies that are kind of emerging, that are kind of like trying to blend different elements of those stacks, right? So like you might have like a Stig or a Schematic, or kind of trying to blend the finance stack and like the product stack and make it easier to actually like code new pricing models for their engineering team, right? And then you have, Orb and Metronome, who I think are, like you guys are very familiar with them. They just came about in the last few years as well, and are kind of going after that like consumption billing and trying to really kind of like, give a tool again to developers that makes it easier to charge for consumption. And then there are players kind of like up in like the quote to cash space, like new.io and like Monetize now. There are a bunch of players that have entered the space in the last decade. And I think it's becoming a hot space because people are realizing how important pricing is to your overall success. And they're realizing how big of a lever it is. To your point around like some of the trends that I'm seeing with the stack, I mean, some of these strategies that we're talking about are very, very hard to accomplish with a legacy tech stack, right? So like if you're looking to have like a hybrid model, or you're looking for a consumption model, or you're looking for an outcome-based pricing model, it's going to be really hard to do that stuff, or credit model, whatever it is, without having the right tech stack to make it like easy to change, unless you have a really great engineering team that can kind of like hard code all of that sort of stuff and do it somehow easily and maintain it easily, which I'm not an engineer, but from what I've heard that's extremely hard. So I'm seeing a lot of companies start thinking about their tech stack. Whenever somebody joins PricingSaaS as a member, we ask them a couple questions. We ask them if they're currently working on pricing, and we ask them if they're currently evaluating their tech stack. I'd say about 50% of people that come into our website are evaluating their tech stack. So it's definitely top of mind, I think, for a lot of companies of a wide range of sizes. Like I'm always surprised by how many companies come through. They're in like the SMB mid-market category that are evaluating their pricing tech stack. So I think this is something that like is really top of mind for everybody, not just like the big enterprise companies.
Yeah, and I think I think a big driver on that recently has really been everybody wanting to be able to bring AI into their product story, right? And then there's, how am I going to evaluate how people are using that? How am I tracking the use of that? How am I tracking everything that's going on when someone's interacting with that agent and putting it on there? And so there's a lot of pricing curiosity, or a lot of, I almost think of it back of the first days of, the Internet of Things. It was the same kind of conversations of how do I get the value out of these microtransactions, or there's some things that are really valuable and some things that aren't so valuable from a pure outcome perspective, but there's value throughout the whole chain in there. And how do I price all those things? And then I'm curious in those AI conversations that you're having of what you're seeing. We see some people that are tokenized, we see some people that are outcome, we see some other people that are more of a kind of an employee assistant agent perspective. And I'm just curious on what your views on some of those pricing models look like.
Yeah, so it's funny you bring this up. I was talking to somebody yesterday who is building an AI powered product in the sales research space, and he's planning on pricing by credits. And I think it's like, at first I thought that it didn't really make a ton of sense because credits can be kind of complex. He's going from 0 to 1 with pricing. But then he started talking about how much it actually costs for him to run this research product. And like, he's acutely aware of his margins. And I think like that's one thing that I'm seeing way more of. I'm seeing way more startup founders, way more pricing people talking way more about margins than they used to, just because of like the sheer, I think, legibility that we have to the margins of these AI products and how expensive they can get super fast if you're not really careful about that. And so like, I think you're starting to see, especially with these credit models, like a lot of these companies have, these credit allowances that they'll bake into their plans that tie back to like specific values for different actions, right? So it's like, if we send an email for you, it's 5 credits. If we, create a new list for you, it's 10 credits, whatever it is. And it's really, really interesting. I think it's like, I typically have approached pricing from more of kind of like a design standpoint and more of almost like an aesthetic standpoint of like seeing what works from like a sales perspective, a marketing perspective, like how can you tell a story, like a kind of a narrative perspective around pricing. But obviously a huge component of pricing is math and like understanding the margin underneath. And I think like with these credit models, people that really understand that stuff and like really can get super granular with those different actions and understand how much those actions actually cost, there are going to be some amazing margin opportunities, because you can create these situations where you're getting at the very least like a 70 to 80% margin, but then like most of your customers probably won't hit their credit limit, right? So like there's a way, I think, for people to get some really solid margins on these AI products if they're smart about it and if they do the hard work of like really itemizing everything that they're charging for and getting super granular in there, which goes back into our conversation around tech stack. Most of the time, you're not gonna be able to do that with a legacy tech stack unless you have a really, really strong engineering team who really gets it.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the things we've been having similar conversations with. It's like, look, I love this idea of outcomes and charging based on outcomes, but in reality is I've got the backend infrastructure that's providing all this, and I need to pay for my backend infrastructure. And reality is if I take a look at it, same thing if I had an employee doing that work for me, it's not just their outcome. I just don't pay them on their outcome. They have a value that they offer throughout the day. They've sent emails, they've done phone calls, they've done these sorts of things. So there's value throughout what they're doing for me. And so that's value that I can price and sell to my customer, because it's not just the outcome that was valuable to them.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I think with outcomes, like to double click on outcomes for a second, the reason I think we've seen so few outcome-based pricing strategies is because to have a successful outcome-based pricing strategy, you have to do 3 things. You need to actually define like a discrete outcome that is measurable and that makes sense. You need to agree with your customers that that outcome is correct, right? So like you need to not only define it, but you need alignment with customers on that outcome. And then you need to build a product that can do it reliably, right? So there are like these 3 things that make outcome-based pricing really, really hard. And so I think we're pretty far away from outcome-based pricing in most areas of SaaS. I know like Intercom has done a great job with their Fin AI agent, and they've gotten a ton of well-deserved press for what they've done there. But at the end of the day, that's like a support ticket is something that's pretty easy to measure. I think if you go further down the stack in SaaS, there's a lot of things that you're looking for help with that don't have that level of finality and that measurability that's like really easy to see. So I'm curious. I've been following what Kyle Poyer's putting out there. He does a good job of aggregating a lot of the outcome-based pricing strategies. He's seeing the guys at Paid are doing a cool job with this, Manny and Arnon. So I think it's obviously on the rise. I do think it's going to be a long time before most SaaS companies actually move towards outcomes.
Well, and I think you hit a really good point there on like the definition of what the outcome is, right? Because we all know for things that happen, let's say it's closing a sales deal, right? Like there's so many things that go into closing that sales deal. There's like, it's the salesperson that's involved. What are the back and forth? What's their price, sensitivity? What are all these? There's all sorts of things on the win-loss and retrospective that goes into, seeing who won a deal. So now what was then attributed back, right? Same thing from a marketing perspective. You try to do a marketing, attribution to what created the conversion on that lead. Well, was it the 17 ads that they saw, the 3 blog posts they read, and then finally It was like a social post from the CEO that triggered them to submit the form? Like, what part of that change? Each one of those things had value in that decision that happened. So attribution is really, really difficult in an outcome-based pricing model.
Totally. That's I completely agree. I think attribution is really tough. And like to your point, like the weights of different actions on the actual outcome is super, super hard to define. Like I think it's a really challenging thing to kind of like completely quantify that. And I would agree with you. I think that's one of the biggest reasons and one of the biggest blockers to adoption with outcome-based pricing.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the thing that we saw in IoT is the same thing we're starting to see in SaaS now, right? Is that your pricing can be a really big strategic advantage for you. And one of the big things that we were hearing from IoT companies was, well, I want to experiment with new pricing because I could end up being the market leader in some new way that I've tried. Or if someone else cracks the code, I need to fast follow real quick, right? On these things. So I wonder if there's some things that you can share around kind of, using your pricing strategically for growing your business. Yeah,
definitely. I think I think it all kind of depends on like what you're ultimately trying to do and kind of like what your strategy is. Like one of my absolute favorite examples of pricing kind of like transforming a market is what happened with Zoom and how they used freemium. So like when Zoom entered video conferencing, so first of all, Eric Yuan, their CEO, was from Cisco WebEx. He had a ton of experience in the space. He knew that there was kind of like a new paradigm coming for video conferencing, and he knew it could be better and went out and obviously did it. So Zoom is a great product, right? So not taking anything away from that. But when they launched, their competitors all had these like very, very tightly limited free plans. Like I think Cisco had like a free trial for 7 days where you could have like 2 or 3 users on it. Same with GoToMeeting, same with Join Me, whatever. Like the other players in the space offered a very, very limited free experience. And Zoom kind of flipped that on its head. They allowed people to use Zoom for up to 50 people, but they capped the length of the meeting. So they capped the meeting at 40 minutes. So like their limit on the free plan wasn't on how many people could use it. It was on how long the meeting could be, which actually gave people a way to use the product like they would use it at their real company. Like you could have like a team meeting with 7 people, 8 people, whatever, or like an entire company meeting if you really wanted to. And their bet was that over time, like real companies are going to want meetings for longer than 40 minutes, right? So like they eventually saw that conversion. They saw people upgrade to the paid version. So I think that's a super smart way to do it, right? I think like another really cool example is Notion. So Notion, I think kind of came onto the market, and like I remember when Notion came out, I was looking at it more as kind of like a competitor to Evernote, right? Like a note-taking app for personal knowledge management. And I think Notion realized that, like consumers are fickle. That's not like our end game. We don't want to be like a note-taking app for, consumers. We want to be kind of like a collaborative platform for knowledge sharing for companies and for groups and for teams. And so at a certain point, I forget exactly when, I think it was back in 2022, they basically just made their entire personal plan free and basically just started monetizing their collaboration and team features. And so I think like that kind of like pushed them it made it very clear like what their strategy is, right? Like they're giving away their product for free to individual users just to kind of drive market share and drive awareness. And then they're monetizing when teams actually are using the product. And then an interesting example for them too is how they're pricing AI. And like this is something that I think is kind of cool too. So like if you look at how Notion prices AI, they use an add-on that you can kind of like they give some AI to their free product and have like a certain amount of AI built into their normal product. But then you can use their Notion add-on, which I believe is still like $8 a month. And the cool thing about this is like, from what I just mentioned, you can probably infer like Notion has a huge free user base, right? So like I use Notion personally, I use the free plan and get a ton of value out of it. What's cool about the add-on approach is it allows them to monetize their massive free user base. So if people are running into limits on the free plan with AI, they can buy the AI add-on. And now all of a sudden they're paying customers paying Notion $8 a month, which is huge. And then obviously you get like higher ACVs out of the paid and team plans too, which is a huge lever to people. But then you contrast that with a company like Loom. So Loom had an add-on for AI for I think like 6 months or so. But the thing about Loom is their free plan isn't like a perpetual free plan like Notion. Like you can stay on Notion's free plan forever if you're getting value out of it. With Loom, you have this limit of like 25 free Loom videos, right? And like you can technically go in and delete them and like keep on going if you want to. But ultimately, if you're using it a lot, you're probably not going to do that. You're just going to upgrade. And so an add-on for them doesn't really allow them to monetize their free user base. And so what they ended up doing is they transitioned their add-on into a new plan kind of between business and enterprise. There was kind of this like business plus AI plan. So it made business their kind of like entry-level paid tier. It gave them this wedge kind of between business and enterprise. It allowed a lot more value for these companies that weren't quite ready for enterprise, but still wanted to use AI. And my assumption is that the Loom team saw a ton of engagement and usage from business customers with their AI add-on. And they were like, this actually makes a lot of sense. Like this is the type of company, the type of customer that is going to get value out of our AI tools. And so they made that move accordingly. But yeah, so I know that was kind of a lengthy, convoluted answer, but like those are a few of the ways that I've seen pricing be like really interesting and ways that kind of like align with different strategies. And I think like the biggest thing that I've noticed lately among like companies like HubSpot, Monday, Asana, these kind of like customer facing applications is using credits and like weaving credits into the model. And I think how these companies are doing it is really smart. It's usually for AI functionality. It's a way for them to do what we were talking about earlier, which is offer AI functionality without breaking the bank and without having a situation where, a customer could run up a massive bill that then the vendor has to pay for. So that's been a fun thing to see too. But yeah, it's always fun to watch, man. There's so much cool stuff going on.
So much, strategy and thoughts about how to do that. And I'm wondering maybe like just along the strategy line there, I wonder if you can maybe give us some final thoughts or final advice on, a company that is looking to evaluate their current pricing, examine what the market is doing. Like what are the steps or first steps or advice that you would give them to kind of start on that process and what that looks like?
Yeah, definitely. So I learned this sequence at Profitwell, but I will typically look and start with like, I like thinking about like packages or like pricing plans or whatever your pricing model is as kind of like solving for a particular job, right? And that job should be serving a particular persona. So I think the companies that really win with pricing really understand their buyer personas, and they really understand. They have them quantified too. It's not just like this person is a director of ops. He went to this college. He likes college football, whatever. It's like this person, like gets value out of this feature and is willing to pay this much for that feature. Like I think that's kind of a necessary step in understanding your target customer. And I think I typically start with that. So like if you're looking at a company, who already has an existing pricing model, I would first take a look at their pricing. If it's good, better, best, I would try to make sure that every plan has like a real buyer in mind. It is oriented around solving a specific job for that buyer. And that, it doesn't have to be like a module based thing where it's like, we have this job that we solve this job. Like it can be, we do this for companies under 25 employees. We do this, which is the same thing for companies between 25 and 100. We do this for, and like there are going to be intricacies and nuances of like how you approach that typically. So I like looking at personas and kind of like the job of the pricing and packaging model first to see if there's like any low hanging fruit and anything super easy to identify. The next thing that I like to look at is consumption and like usage thresholds and really kind of thinking around if there's any opportunity there. And so like we talked about Zoom, like Zoom would be a great example. I think like using usage thresholds, whether it's your actual like top level value metric or kind of like a secondary pricing metric that you're using, I think is one of those things that can really move the needle when you're working with customers if you really understand how they're using the product. And you'll see this a lot. Like I've seen this quite a bit in like the I'm trying to think of like how to describe this category. One sec. So like product, basically like the product development space. So like if you look at like StatSig and you look at LaunchDarkly and you look at all those companies, like feature flags are like one way that you could charge for consumption. Another one would be like screen recordings, right? So like there's a lot of movement between those companies in like Mixpanel over the last year and how they're kind of like reshuffling which of those metrics matter, which of them they're giving away for free. And so I love to look at consumption to try to get an understanding of like, is there an opportunity here to either create incremental value compared to competitors or to kind of like rethink the value that comes from different consumption levers and position ourselves for a consumption lever that's more important to our customer than our competitors. So I like going there next. And from there, I like looking at feature packaging. So I like looking to see if, there are any opportunities to like push a value driving feature to an add-on or a core feature to a value driver. And the way that we thought about this is at ProfitWell is we had this kind of like grid. And it was like relative preference for features was on the x-axis, willingness to pay was on the y-axis. Bottom right would be those are features that people like but aren't willing to pay for. Top right would be value drivers. So those are features that people both like and prefer and are also willing to pay a premium for. Those are the features that are typically going to anchor like your upgraded plans and tiers. And then you have like add-ons, which are features in the top left that are not widely preferred, but the people that do prefer them are willing to pay a premium for them. And so I like to kind of like look at the overarching model and get a better understanding of whether or not there are any opportunities to kind of like move some things around based on customer usage and understanding. To figure that out. And then the last thing I look at honestly is price point. So like most of the time, if I'm looking at price point with a company, I generally assume that they have a better understanding of the price points they can charge than I do. Like typically companies know their market and they know their customers' willingness to pay and their appetite for price points better than an objective consultant will right off the bat without doing market research. So yeah, that's kind of the sequence that I go in: personas, consumption, feature packaging, and then actual price points. And yeah, that's typically it.
Perfect. Well, that sounds like a really thoughtful process and practical way to be able to look through it. And I think it's a fantastic way to end the podcast with a bang on some great advice there. So I think, at this point, I just really like to thank you for joining us on the podcast here. Incredible to have you on. Great value that you're able to bring to the community. And just, thanks again for spending your time with us.
Thanks for having me, Tim.